Napoleon Bonaparte, the short man meme, the battlefield genius, the emperor who rose from obscurity to nearly conquer Europe and leave the world reshaped in his image. But what if he went one step further? What if Napoleon not only threatened Britain, but actually conquered it? To pull this off, we need to rewind the clock to the year 1805. At this moment, Britain is an island fortress, its navy unmatched, its economy thriving through global trade. The Royal Navy patrols the seas with supremacy, while Napoleon's France dominates the continent. But Napoleon knows, as long as Britain stands free, his empire can never be secure. Now, in our timeline, Napoleon planned the invasion of Britain, called Operation Sea Lion, before it was cool. Except his version was less about tanks and aircraft and more about wooden ships and horses. He gathered the French army on the coast of Boulogne, training day and night, constructing flat-bottom boats, and preparing for a risky channel crossing. His problem was obvious. The Royal Navy, commanded by Admiral Nelson, stood ready to obliterate any French fleet that dared to leave port. Historically, Napoleon's invasion dreams were crushed at the Battle of Trafalgar, where Nelson's tactics ensured Britain's naval dominance for decades. But what if things went differently? Imagine a sudden storm sweeping across the Channel, blinding the British fleet and scattering their ships, while Napoleon's admirals capitalize on this chaos. In the confusion, the French and their Spanish allies managed to punch through, establishing control over a critical stretch of sea just long enough to ferry soldiers across. Within days, tens of thousands of French troops land on British soil, marching through Kent and heading straight for London. The shock would be overwhelming. The British government had prepared for such an invasion with militias and coastal defenses, but against the largest and most experienced army in Europe, their chances looked grim. The fall of London would not just be a military victory, it would be a psychological earthquake across Europe. Britain, the proud island nation that resisted countless enemies from Vikings to the Spanish Armada, would suddenly find itself under foreign occupation. Napoleon would have forced King George to flee, possibly to Canada, or perhaps into exile in Hanover. The Parliament would dissolve under duress, and the Bank of England seize to fund Napoleon's empire. With Britain broken, France would stand unchallenged on the continent for the first time in modern history. But hold on, what about the colonies? Britain's empire stretched across the world: India, the Caribbean, Canada, Australia. Without the metropole, these territories would be thrown into confusion. Napoleon might not have the naval reach to control them, but he wouldn't need to. His allies, Spain and the Dutch, could swoop in, carving up British possessions, while America, recently independent, would watch closely, sensing opportunity to expand its influence, even into Canada. Napoleon's victory would not just redraw European borders, it would redraw the map of the entire world. Yet nothing in alternate history comes without a twist, because conquering Britain is one thing, ruling it is another. The British population, deeply nationalistic and fiercely loyal to their traditions, would never accept French rule quietly. Guerrilla resistance would erupt in the countryside. Smuggling networks would fuel rebellions. Scottish Highlanders might rise again. Irish revolutionaries, long oppressed, would see their chance for independence. While in London, French administrators would struggle to impose order over a hostile city. Napoleon might install a puppet monarch, perhaps one of his brothers, or even force a marriage alliance to cement legitimacy, but resentment would simmer like fire under ash, waiting for the right spark. This scenario sets the stage for a radically different 19th century. No British Navy to dominate the seas, no Pax Britannica, no balance of power that kept France in check. Instead, a continental empire stretching from Lisbon to London, from Rome to Warsaw, and led by a single Corsican soldier who once seemed destined for exile on a small island, but instead reshaped not just Europe, but the globe. And the most fascinating question is not simply what Napoleon would gain, but what the world would lose without Britain's industrial revolution spreading freely, without British liberal democracy influencing politics, without the Navy protecting trade routes and suppressing piracy. Global commerce could take a darker turn, perhaps dominated by monopolies of empire rather than free trade. And the revolutions of 1848 might play out very differently under French hegemony. In short, Napoleon conquering Britain could mean a century where French becomes the global language, not English, and the world order we know today might never exist. So Napoleon now controls Britain, or at least he thinks he does. With London captured and King George exiled, the French emperor turns his attention to consolidating power. The first step is to deal with the British Navy, still a massive threat, scattered but not destroyed. Napoleon seizes the shipyards of Portsmouth and attempts to rebuild the fleet under French banners. But here is the problem. Sailors are not loyal to invaders. Many of them slip away to fight from the colonies or regroup in Canada. This means Napoleon cannot fully dominate the oceans, but he does not need to control every sea lane. As long as he controls the heart of Britain, he can use its financial system and industries to fuel his machine. The Bank of England falls under French administration, and suddenly the gold reserves that once backed British trade are redirected toward French armies across Europe. Napoleon introduces reforms in London, mimicking what he did in Paris, centralizing education, reorganizing law, and creating a bureaucracy that serves the empire. The British elite either flee abroad or bend the knee. Those who resist face exile, imprisonment, or worse. The French tricolor flies over Buckingham Palace, and Napoleon celebrates his greatest triumph yet. But the world outside Europe is not sitting idle. Across the Atlantic, America watches with fascination and fear. President Thomas Jefferson realizes that the balance of power has shifted overnight. Without Britain acting as a counterweight, Napoleon could easily turn his gaze westward. America is young, fragile, and still divided, but it has something Napoleon craves: resources, food, timber, cotton. The Louisiana Purchase already placed vast tracts of land under Jefferson's control, but now he wonders whether France might regret giving it away. What if Napoleon demands it back, emboldened by his victory over Britain? Meanwhile, in India, the British East India Company is thrown into chaos, its lifeline to London cut off. French influence begins to seep into the subcontinent with the support of local rulers who resent British dominance. Suddenly, the dream of French India seems possible once again. The Mughal Empire is weak, fragmented, but alliances with French officers and resources could turn the tide. Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch each scrambled to seize abandoned British ports from Africa to Asia, carving up what used to be the world's largest empire. The global chessboard is being flipped upside down. And yet, while Napoleon feasts on victory, cracks begin to show. Ruling Britain is no easy task. The Scottish Highlands are in revolt. The Irish rise up in Dublin and Belfast, declaring their own republic. Guerrilla bands raid supply lines in the English countryside. French garrisons must be stationed everywhere, which stretches resources thin. While Napoleon commands loyalty from his marshals, the local administrators he installs often prove corrupt or brutal, alienating the population even further. And across the Channel, Britain's exiled government in Canada works tirelessly to rally support, calling on colonies and allies to resist French tyranny. This creates a strange paradox. Napoleon conquers Britain, but in doing so, he creates two Britons. One occupied and smoldering under French rule, the other exiled and free, clinging to its empire in Canada and the Caribbean. The rivalry between these two shadows of Britain could become one of the defining conflicts of the 19th century, with France always looming over Europe and the exiled Britain using its overseas holdings to undermine Napoleon at every opportunity. At the same time, the Industrial Revolution is disrupted.
Britain was the birthplace of steam engines, textile mills, and mechanized factories, but under French control, innovation slows. Some entrepreneurs flee to America, others to Prussia or Austria, carrying secrets of industry with them. Instead of a British-led industrial revolution, the world may see a fragmented patchwork of industrial centers, with France taking the lead, but slower, less dynamic, without the competition that historically pushed Britain forward. This delay might mean that railroads, telegraphs, and steamships all arrive decades later, changing the tempo of the 19th century in ways that are hard to imagine. For Europe, the implications are enormous. With Britain subdued, Napoleon is free to enforce his continental system without resistance. He bans British goods, forces nations like Prussia and Austria to adopt French economic rules, and turns the continent into a single, massive market under his control. Trade flows through French ports, wealth pours into French banks. Paris becomes not only the political capital of Europe, but also its economic heart. Critics are silenced, rivals crushed. Napoleon stands unchallenged. Yet there is one man who watches all this with growing unease. Across the steppes of Russia, Tsar Alexander broods. Napoleon's dominance threatens his empire. Trade routes disrupted, ambitions checked. Sooner or later, conflict between France and Russia becomes inevitable. And when it comes, the absence of a free Britain to back coalitions against Napoleon could mean disaster for Europe, or perhaps an even bloodier clash on the plains of Eastern Europe. The stage is being set for wars that make our timeline look tame. So Napoleon conquering Britain does not end history. It explodes it into chaos. The world order is shattered, colonies crumble, revolutions ignite, and the industrial age is delayed, all because one storm in the Channel turned in Napoleon's favor.
Napoleon's banners wave over London, but beneath the surface, the island is boiling. The British people have never been easy to subdue, and centuries of defiance against invaders have prepared them for this moment. While Napoleon holds the cities with disciplined garrisons, the countryside turns into a battlefield of shadows. Smugglers, spies, and farmers-turned-fighters keep the French on edge. Every mile of road between Dover and Edinburgh is haunted by the threat of ambush. Nowhere is resistance stronger than in Ireland. For decades, Irish rebels dreamed of breaking free from British rule, but under Napoleon, their dream twists into a nightmare. At first, the French present themselves as liberators, promising independence and rights. But quickly it becomes clear that Napoleon is not here to create a free Ireland. He is here to use it as a pawn. French troops occupy Dublin. French ships patrol Cork, and the Irish realize they have simply traded one master for another. Still, rebellions erupt in the countryside, fueled by resentment and centuries of oppression. Catholic priests preach resistance. Secret societies gather weapons, and soon the Emerald Isle is drenched in fire once again. Scotland, too, becomes a thorn in Napoleon's side. The Highland clans, proud and defiant, rise up in the mountains. French detachments sent north are met with fierce ambushes and brutal terrain. The Highlands become a quagmire, just as they had been for English armies centuries before. Local leaders rally around the idea that Scotland must reclaim independence. Under the chaos, banners of rebellion fly across the glens, forcing Napoleon to pour more soldiers into a land that yields little profit. In England itself, resistance takes on a quieter, but no less dangerous form. Pamphlets circulate in the night, denouncing French tyranny. Taverns buzz with whispers of rebellion, and smuggling networks bring in weapons from overseas. France finds itself in a situation eerily similar to what Britain once faced in the American Revolution. A powerful army can win battles, but cannot easily crush the will of a population determined to resist. Every year that passes without complete control drains French resources and weakens morale. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America grows stronger.
Emboldened by Britain's fall, President Jefferson and his successors see opportunity. The exiled British government in Canada forms alliances with Washington, but America understands the situation differently. Without Britain to check French power, America must prepare for the possibility of direct confrontation. The Louisiana Purchase already doubled its size, but with France now ascendant in Europe, there is fear that Napoleon might seek to reclaim it. American leaders push for stronger militias, new fortifications, and expansion westward to secure the young nation's future. Trade routes shift dramatically. The Royal Navy, once a guardian of global commerce, is fractured. Exiled fleets patrol the Atlantic, but France tries to enforce its own control. America becomes a key player in this contest. Neutral ships carrying cotton, timber, and grain find themselves caught between French blockades and British privateers. The seas grow lawless, piracy spikes, commerce suffers. But America learns valuable lessons in naval construction and maritime strategy, laying the foundation for what could become a great naval power in the decades ahead. The colonies of Britain, meanwhile, are fractured. India sees a surge of French influence as local rulers ally with Napoleon's envoys to push back against the East India Company. The Caribbean islands fall into chaos as French, Spanish, and Dutch forces seize former British possessions. Canada becomes a strange mirror world, a Britain in exile, building institutions, maintaining loyalty to the crown, and plotting a return to the homeland. This Canada may grow far stronger than in our timeline, as waves of loyalist refugees pour across the Atlantic, bringing wealth, knowledge, and industrial skill with them. Back in Europe, Napoleon faces his greatest test. The longer he stays in Britain, the more his empire begins to strain. Resistance movements cost money, garrisons drain manpower, supply lines stretch thin across the Channel, and whispers of dissent grow louder among his allies. Prussia, Austria, and Russia watch carefully, waiting for weakness. Napoleon must decide whether to double down and try to integrate Britain fully into his empire or cut his losses and turn his attention back to the continent. Either choice carries enormous risks. The most dramatic consequence of this alternate history is the delay of the Industrial Revolution. Britain under occupation does not lead the charge in coal, steam, and steel. Instead, its inventors flee or go underground. Some carry their innovations to Canada, others to America, still others to Prussia or Austria. Instead of one nation spearheading rapid transformation, we see a scattered, slower process. France tries to seize British factories and technology, but bureaucracy and centralization slow progress. The world becomes less industrial, less connected in its growth. The age of railways, telegraphs, and global steamships may come later by decades, reshaping the 19th century into something far less familiar. And yet, despite the chaos, there is opportunity for new powers to rise. America, Canada, even Russia may find themselves in stronger positions in this world without British dominance. The global balance is no longer anchored by an island navy, but sways under the weight of continental empires. Napoleon has won the greatest prize in Europe, but in doing so, he has set the world ablaze.
Napoleon sits upon the throne of Europe, his empire stretched from the Pyrenees to the Highlands, from the Rhine to the Thames. Yet even emperors must face the weight of time. Conquest is one thing, stability is another. Britain proves harder to tame than Napoleon expected. Rebellions in Ireland, uprisings in Scotland, constant unrest in English towns forced the French army to remain spread thin across the Isles. Napoleon cannot abandon the conquest, for it is the jewel of his empire, but neither can he extract all its wealth without igniting more fury. Each year the occupation grows costlier. Each year the resentment burns hotter. Across the seas, the exiled British government in Canada becomes a beacon for resistance. Royalist fleets patrol the Atlantic, disrupting French commerce with the help of American shipbuilders who are learning the arts of naval construction faster than anyone expected. By the 1820s, America is no longer a fragile republic clinging to survival. It is a rising power, driven by fear of France and opportunity for expansion. Its population grows, its industries bloom, and its leaders speak openly of dominating the continent. Without Britain to overshadow it, the United States steps boldly onto the world stage, decades earlier than in our timeline. In India, the East India Company collapses under pressure. French officers ally with local princes, and for a time it seems that French India may become reality. Yet the region is too vast, too complex for even Napoleon's reach. Disease, terrain, and political rivalries bog down attempts at control. The dream of a French-dominated India flickers, but does not burn bright. Instead, the subcontinent becomes a patchwork of semi-independent states, with French advisors and weapons tilting the balance of power. No single empire rises there, and the path of Indian history is forever altered. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution sputters. The steam engines and textile mills of Manchester and Birmingham fall silent under occupation. Inventors flee, some to Canada, some to America, some to Prussia. Innovation spreads, but without the concentration of talent and capital that Britain once offered, progress slows. Railways are built later, telegraphs delayed, the great age of steamships postponed. The 19th century becomes an era of uneven industrial growth, with pockets of modernity in Paris, Berlin, Boston, and Toronto, but vast regions still stuck in older ways. The gap between Europe and the rest of the world narrows, and the dominance of the West emerges less sharply than in our reality. Napoleon himself ages. The conqueror who once rode at the head of armies finds himself surrounded by administrators, bureaucrats, and rebels. His marshals whisper of fatigue. His soldiers grumble about endless garrison duty in hostile lands. Tsar Alexander still looms in the east. The rivalry between France and Russia eventually boils over, as it always must. Napoleon cannot ignore the steppes forever, and when war comes, it is even bloodier than in our timeline. Without Britain to bankroll coalitions, Russia must stand nearly alone. But with endless manpower and burning resolve, they grind down the French advance. Winter still bites, supply lines still snap, and Napoleon faces the same fate he always feared. Yet in this world, his fall does not mean a return to balance. There is no Britain really to seize global leadership, no Pax Britannica waiting to stabilize trade and expand industry. Instead, the 19th century fractures into competing empires. France weakened but still dominant, Russia bloodied but unbroken, America young but ambitious, Canada loyal to its exiled crown and growing stronger by the year. The world becomes multipolar, a stage of clashing titans without a clear hegemon. For ordinary people, the consequences are immense. Revolutions still erupt in 1848, but without Britain's liberal influence, they take on a darker, harsher edge. Democracy spreads more slowly, nationalism more violently. The abolition of slavery is delayed. Without Britain's push, the transatlantic trade lingers longer. America still abolishes eventually, but under greater strain and bloodshed. Canada struggles with loyalty to a distant crown, while also absorbing waves of British refugees, blending old-world aristocracy with new-world frontier spirit. Europe remains a cauldron of rivalries, simmering under French pressure, waiting for the next great war. So what is the legacy of Napoleon conquering Britain in this alternate world? He achieved what no general before or after managed. He broke the island fortress and placed its crown beneath his heel. Yet the cost of that victory reshaped the world. The Industrial Revolution slowed, the balance of power shattered, democracy delayed, and empires fractured. Instead of 1 century of British dominance, we see a century of chaos, struggle, and shifting alliances. A world where no single language, no single navy, no single empire commands the globe, but rather a turbulent contest of giants. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson in alternate history.
Every victory carries its own seeds of defeat. Napoleon may have conquered Britain, but in doing so, he unleashed forces beyond his control. Rebellions in the Isles, rivalries abroad, and technological disruption all conspired to unravel his dream. The world he left behind was not one of lasting French glory, but one of endless struggle, a world forever remade by the storm that once turned the channel in his favor.